The black volcanic sand burned through my dungarees as I pressed my face against it, machine gun bullets snapping overhead like angry hornets. My entrenching tools scraped uselessly against the loose ash. There was nowhere to dig, nowhere to hide. Just 8 yards of open beach between me and the water's edge, and 2 miles of Japanese hell stretching ahead to Mount Suribachi. The bastards had turned this godforsaken rock into a fortress, and we were walking straight into their killing ground. I'm Staff Sergeant Tommy McKenna, 5th Marine Division, 27th Regiment. I've seen my share of Pacific Islands, from Guadalcanal to Saipan, but nothing prepared me for Iwo Jima. February 19, 1945. D-Day on 8 square miles of volcanic ash that would claim more Marine blood than any battle in our Corps history. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning, when we still thought the Navy's 3-day bombardment had done its job. The landing craft pitched and rolled in the heavy seas as we approached Red Beach 1. 40 Marines packed into our Higgins boat like sardines, green around the gills from the rough crossing. Most of the boys were quiet, checking their rifles one more time, adjusting their gear. A few whispered prayers. Corporal Jimmy Santos from Brooklyn kept making jokes nobody laughed at. "Hey, McKenna," he called over the engine noise. "Think the Japs are going to roll out the welcome wagon?" I looked at the kid, 19 years old, smooth-faced that hadn't seen enough of this war yet. "Keep your head down when we hit the beach, Santos. This ain't gonna be like the movies." Through the gray dawn, Iwo Jima rose from the Pacific like something out of a nightmare. Mount Suribachi, a 550-foot extinct volcano, dominated the southern tip of the island like a black pyramid. Even from 2 miles out, I could see the honeycomb of caves and bunkers carved into its slopes. Every ridge, every ravine had been turned into a fortress. Our coxswain, a Navy kid who couldn't have been 20, shouted over his shoulder, 2 minutes. The bombardment had lifted just before dawn. For 72 straight hours, our battleships and cruisers had pounded this rock with the heaviest naval gunfire in Pacific War history. Over 22,000 shells had crashed into these 8 square miles. B-24s from the Marianas had been hitting Japanese positions for weeks. The brass told us it would be a walk in the park. They were wrong. The first sign of trouble came when our boat scraped bottom 50 yards from shore. The black sand shelved so gradually that the Higgins boats couldn't get close. We'd have to wade in through surf and loose volcanic ash. Over the side, I yelled, grabbing my M1 Garand and pack. "Move it, Marines." I dropped into waist-deep water, immediately feeling the weight of my soaked gear trying to drag me down. The volcanic sand shifted under every step like quicksand. Behind me, 40 Marines splashed into the surf, struggling toward a beach that looked innocent enough in the gray morning light. Too innocent. We'd made it maybe 20 yards when the world exploded. The Japanese had held their fire during the initial landing, letting thousands of Marines pile onto the beaches. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the brilliant commanding the island's defense, had planned this perfectly. Wait until the beaches were packed with Americans, then unleash hell from prepared positions. The first mortar round landed 10 feet to my left, throwing up a geyser of black sand and shrapnel. Before I could even hit the deck, machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions all along the beach. Not random fire, carefully aimed, interlocking fields that had been plotted and registered for months. "Get off the beach," I screamed, though my voice was lost in the chaos. "Move inland." But there was nowhere to go. The beach sloped up from the water in a series of terraces, each one swept by Japanese fire. The black volcanic sand offered no protection. You couldn't dig a proper foxhole, couldn't get solid footing to advance. Every step forward was like walking uphill through loose gravel while someone tried to kill you. Corporal Santos took a bullet through the shoulder not 10 feet from where we'd landed. He spun around and went down hard, his rifle flying. I crawled over to him, dragging my gear through the ash. I'm okay, Sarge, he gasped, blood seeping through his dungarees. Just wing me. A mortar round bracketed us, close enough to fill my mouth with grit. Like hell you're okay. Corpsman. Corpsman up. The cry echoed up and down the beach as Navy medics crawled between the wounded Andying. These guys were angels, running through machine gun fire to patch up Marines, dragging the wounded back to the water's edge where boats could evacuate them. I got Santos to a medic, then worked my way forward with what was left of my squad. Ahead of us, the first terrace was maybe 30 yards away. It might as well have been 30 miles. Every time a Marine tried to advance, Japanese gunners cut him down from positions we couldn't even see. The enemy had spent 8 months turning Iwo Jima into an underground fortress. 16 miles of tunnels connected bunkers, command posts, and ammunition dumps. They had fields of fire plotted to the inch. Camouflage gun positions were cut so deep into volcanic rock that our naval bombardment had barely scratched them. And they were fighting differently than on other islands. No more banzai charges, no more wasteful human wave attacks. Kuribayashi had ordered his 21,000 defenders to stay in their positions and fight to the last man. Make the Americans pay in blood for every yard. They were keeping their promise. By noon on D-Day, we'd managed to push maybe 200 yards inland. The cost was horrific. Bodies lay scattered across the black sand like broken dolls. The surf ran red where wounded Marines waited for evacuation boats. The lucky ones were unconscious. I'd lost half my squad already. Private Kelly from Chicago took a sniper's bullet through the head while trying to spot Japanese positions. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped on a mine that shredded his legs. The kid had been scheduled to rotate home in 2 weeks. But we kept moving because that's what Marines do. Step by bloody step, we clawed our way up those terraces toward the ridges beyond. Not because we were heroes, though plenty of heroes died on that beach, but because stopping meant dying, and dying meant letting down the guys next to you. The Japanese had prepared for everything except the sheer stubborn guts of American Marines. They'd planned their defense perfectly, but they'd underestimated what desperate men could accomplish when their backs were against the wall. McKenna, Lieutenant Davidson, crawled up beside me, his face blackened with volcanic ash and cordite. We need to take out that pillbox on the left. It's got my whole platoon pinned down. I looked where he was pointing. A concrete bunker, camouflaged so perfectly I'd walked past it twice without seeing it. The muzzle of a Japanese machine gun poked through an embrasure, sweeping the beach with deadly precision. I'll take Kowalski and Thompson, I said. Give us covering fire on my signal. Davidson nodded. Make it count, Sergeant. We can't stay here much longer. He was right. Japanese artillery and mortars were finding the range. Every few minutes, a barrage would crash into the crowded beach, sending Marines diving for cover that didn't exist. The enemy had pre-registered every yard of this killing ground. They were just taking their time, picking their shots. I gathered what was left of my fire team, Kowalski, a coal miner's son from Pennsylvania, and Thompson, a farm boy from Iowa who could shoot the wings off a fly. Both had that 1,000-yard stare you get after too many islands, too many friends lost. See that pillbox? I pointed it out to them. Thompson, you put rifle fire through that embrasure. Keep their heads down. Kowalski, you're with me. We'll work around the right side with grenades. Thompson checked his M1, chambered around. How many Japs you figure are in there, Sarge? Does it matter? They're between us and Mount Suribachi. We moved out during the next artillery barrage, using the noise and smoke for cover. The Japanese bunker was built into a natural depression, with interconnected trenches and firing positions. Getting close would mean crawling through a moonscape of shell craters and scattered equipment. Thompson found a good firing position behind the wreckage of an Amtrak and started putting rounds through the machine gun embrasure. His shooting was picture perfect, space shots that kept the Japanese gunners ducking without wasting ammunition. Kowalski and I worked our way around the flank, staying low, moving during Thompson's covering fire. The volcanic sand was treacherous, loose and shifting, making every movement awkward. But it also meant we could approach without making noise. 20 yards from the bunker, I could hear Japanese voices inside. At least 3 men, maybe more. They were talking quietly, professionally. These weren't scared kids like we'd faced on some islands. These were veterans who knew their business. I pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade, held the spoon down. Kowalski did the same. We'd have to get them both through the embrasure at the same time. One grenade might not be enough, and we wouldn't get a second chance. On 3, I whispered. 1, 2. The machine gun opened up again, raking Thompson's position. Rock chips flew as bullets sparked off the Amtrak's armor. 3. We came up together, throwing hard and fast. Both grenades sailed through the narrow opening. I counted off the seconds, 1001, 1002. The bunker erupted in smoke and flame. The machine gun fell silent, but the victory was temporary. Within menus, rifle fire started coming from other positions we hadn't even spotted. For every Japanese strongpoint we knocked out, 2 more seemed to appear. The enemy had prepared multiple fallback positions, alternate firing points, interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach. This was going to be a long, bloody fight. The first night on Iwo Jima was pure hell. We'd managed to push maybe 700 yards inland by sunset, establishing a precarious foothold on the southern end of the island. But the Japanese owned the darkness. They came at us in small groups, infiltrators slipping through our lines to plant mines, cut communications, and pick off sentries. Not the wild bonsai charged off other campaigns, but calculated raids designed to wear us down, keep us from sleeping, make us jumpy and trigger happy. I was sharing a shallow scrape with Kowalski when the first probe came around midnight. No sound, no warning, just muzzle flashes in the dark and the distinctive crack of Japanese rifles. Different from our M1s, sharper somehow. Contact front. Someone screamed down the line. Japs in the wire. There was no wire. We hadn't had time to string proper defenses, just scattered ourselves in whatever cover we could find and hoped for the best. Now we were paying for it. Kowalski had his Thompson submachine gun ready. He traded his rifle for it afterward, took the pillbox. How many you figure, Sarge? Don't matter. Just keep shooting till they stop moving. The firefight lasted maybe 10 minutes. When it was over, we found 6 Japanese bodies in front of our positions. They'd gotten within grenade range before we spotted them. If they'd been more aggressive, or if we'd been less alert, they might have broken through. But that was just the beginning. All night long, they kept coming. Small groups, individual snipers, suicide bombers with explosives strapped to their chests. They'd hit one section of our line, fall back, then hit somewhere else 20 minutes later. By dawn, every Marine on the island was exhausted, jumpy, and running low on ammunition. We'd held our positions, but barely. And somewhere up in those caves and bunkers, thousands more Japanese waited for us. Mount Suribachi loomed over everything, dark and threatening in the morning light. Intelligence said it was honeycombed with caves and tunnels, packed with artillery and mortars that could hit every inch of the beach. As long as the Japanese held Suribachi, they could make life hell for anyone trying to land supplies or reinforcements. The mountain had to be taken, and that job fell to the 28th Marines. The assault on Mount Suribachi began on D+1, February 20th. I watched from our positions as the 28th Marines formed up for the attack, knowing I was looking at some of the bravest men who ever lived. They had to cross 1,000 yards of open ground swept by enemy fire, then climb a fortress that had been 8 months in the making. Colonel Harry, the horse, Liversedge, commanded the 28th Marines. Tough as nails, smart as a whip, and absolutely fearless, He'd studied every aerial photograph of Suribachi, memorized every known gun position, planned the assault down to the last detail. But no plan survives contact with the enemy, especially when the enemy has spent months preparing to kill you. The attack jumped off at 0830, following a brief artillery barrage. From my position, I could see the Marines moving forward in short rushes, up and run, hit the deck, crawl forward, up and run again. It was textbook infantry tactics, but the Japanese had textbooks too. Machine gun fire from hidden positions raked the attacking companies. Mortars dropped out of the sky like deadly rain. Snipers picked off Marines from caves so well concealed they were invisible until muzzle flashes gave them away. But the 28th Marines kept coming. When one man fell, another took his place. When a squadron pinned down, the next squad moved around the flank. They took casualties that would have stopped most units, but they never stopped advancing. By evening, they'd fought their way to the base of Suribachi itself. The real battle was just beginning. The mountain was a fortress within a fortress. Every cave had been turned into a firing position. Artillery pieces were pulled back into tunnels after firing, making them nearly impossible to spot from the air. Japanese engineers had carved out underground barracks, ammunition storage, and command posts connected by miles of tunnels. Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi commanded Suribachi's defenders, over 2,000 men armed with everything from Riflesto coastal defense guns. He'd prepared his positions for a siege, stockpiling food, water, and ammunition for months of fighting. But he hadn't counted on the determination of American Marines. The fighting for Suribachi took 4 days of the most brutal combat I'd ever seen. Not the dramatic charges you see in the movies, but yard by yard, cave by cave fighting that ground men down like hamburger meat. The Marines used everything they had: flamethrowers to clear bunkers, demolition charges to seal caves, bazookas to knock out gun positions. When conventional weapons didn't work, they got creative. Tank dozers sealed cave entrances with the Japanese still inside. Engineers pumped gasoline into tunnel systems and ignited it. It was ugly, brutal work. But the Japanese weren't giving quarter, and neither were we. I got my chance to join the fight on D+3 when my regiment was ordered to support the 28th Marines' final assault. By then, the Marines had fought their way halfway up the mountain, leaving a trail of wrecked equipment and dead bodies behind them. The Japanese positions were incredible to see up close. Gun emplacements cut so deep into solid rock that direct hits from battleship guns had barely scratched them. Camouflaged so perfectly that you could walk past them without knowing they were there. Interconnected by tunnels that let defenders move from position to position without exposing themselves. But the Marines had learned to adapt. Flamethrower teams worked with rifle squads to clear each position. When flames didn't work, they used explosives. When explosives didn't work, they used more explosives. I was part of a squad tasked with clearing a network of caves on the northeast face of the mountain. Intelligence said it was a command post, heavily defended and crucial to the Japanese defense. The approach was a nightmare. Open ground swept by at least 3 machine gun positions, with sniper fire coming from caves higher up the slope. Getting close enough to use our weapons meant crawling through a maze of volcanic rock and dead bodies. Corporal Martinez, who'd replaced Santos after he was evacuated, took point with a flamethrower. Behind him, Thompson and Kowalski provided rifle fire. I carried extra fuel tanks and demolition charges. Remember, I told them before we moved out, these bastards have been in there for months. They know every rock, every shadow. Don't give them a stationary target. We moved during an artillery barrage, using the noise and smoke for cover. The terrain was treacherous, loose volcanic rock that shifted under your boots, shell craters filled with ash and debris, scattered equipment from previous attacks. 50 yards from the cave entrance, Martinez went down. A sniper's bullet caught him in the chest, spinning him around and sending the flamethrower flying. He was alive, but hurt bad, blood frothing from his mouth when he tried to talk. "Corpsman," I yelled, dragging Martinez behind a boulder. "Corpsman up," but there was no time to wait for a medic. Japanese voices echoed from the cave. They knew we were there, probably calling for reinforcements. We had to move now or lose our chance. Thompson grabbed the flamethrower while Kowalski and I prepared demolition charges. The plan was simple: flame the entrance to drive the Japanese back, then seal the cave with explosives. "You ready?" I asked Thompson. He nodded, adjusting the fuel tanks on his back. "Let's finish this." We rushed the cave entrance together. Thompson's flamethrower lit up the darkness, sending jets of burning fuel deep into the tunnel system. Screams echoed from inside, horrible, inhuman sounds that would haunt my dreams for years. But even burning alive, some of the Japanese kept fighting. Rifle shots rang out from the flames, bullets whining off rock walls. A grenade bounced out of the cave mouth, exploding just yards behind us. I tossed my satchel charge as deep into the cave as I could throw it, then grabbed Thompson and dove for cover. The explosion shook the entire mountainside, bringing down tons of volcanic rock and sealing the cave forever. One position down. Hundreds more to go. On the morning of February 23rd, D+4 Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson's battalion fought their way to the summit of Mount Suribachi. It had taken 4 days of the bloodiest fighting in Marine Corps history, but they'd done it. The mountain was ours. I was still fighting on the lower slopes when word came down that Marines had reached the top. A cheer went up from positions all across the southern end of the island. After 4 days of hell, we'd actually taken the thing. But the Japanese weren't finished. Even with Marines on the summit, enemy positions throughout the mountain continued to resist. Cave systems that had been bypassed during the assault still held out, their defenders fighting to the last man. That's when I saw something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. A small patrol was making its way up the slope toward the summit, carrying an American flag on a long pole. Lieutenant Harold Schreier led the group, with Sergeant Lou Lowry, a photographer from Leatherneck magazine, following behind. They reached the top around 10:20 hours, found a piece of Japanese pipe, and raised the stars and stripes over Iwo Jima. From my position halfway down the mountain, I could see that flag whipping in the wind, 40 feet of red, white, and blue against the gray morning sky. Every Marine on the island stopped what he was doing to look up at that flag. For just a moment, the shooting died down as 20,000 Americans absorbed what they were seeing. We'd taken Suribachi. We'd planted our flag on Japanese soil. But the celebration was premature. Japanese artillery from the northern part of the island immediately bracketed the summit. Mortar rounds crashed around the flag, forcing the Marines to taki cover. The enemy wasn't going to let us enjoy our victory in peace. That afternoon, a second flag raising took place. Colonel Johnson wanted a larger flag, one that could be seen from the ships offshore. He sent up a patrol with a bigger banner and orders to secure the summit properly. I didn't see the second flag raising myself. I was busy clearing caves on the lower slopes. But word spread quickly that Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal had captured the moment. 6 Marines raising the flag together, backs bent against the weight of the pole, working as a team to plant it firmly in the volcanic soil. That photograph would become the most famous image of World War II. But at the time, we were too busy fighting to think about history. Suribachi was ours, but the battle for Iwo Jima was just beginning. The northern 2/3 of Iwo Jima made Suribachi look like a training exercise. While we'd been fighting for the mountain, other Marine units had been pushing north against the main Japanese defensive line. They'd run into a buzzsaw. General Kuribayashi had prepared 3 defensive lines across the island, each one stronger than the last. The terrain favored defense, broken ground, deep ravines, ridges and valleys that channeled attacking forces into prepared killing zones. And every position had been improved with months of engineering work. The Japanese called it the meat grinder. Our maps labeled the key positions with names like Hill 382, Turkey Knob, and the Amphitheater. Marines gave them more colorful names that can't be repeated in polite company. On February 24th, my regiment was pulled off Suribachi and thrown into the northern offensive. After 5 days of continuous fighting, we were down to about half strength and running on fumes. But there were no replacements available. Every Marine on the island was either fighting or dead. The attack jumped off at dawn with a preliminary bombardment that shook the ground for miles. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers pounded Japanese positions while Marine artillery added to the din. B-24s from the Marianas dropped tons of bombs on suspected strongpoints. When the barrage lifted, we moved out across terrain that looked like the surface of the moon. Shell craters overlapped shell craters. The few trees that had once covered the island were now just blackened stumps. The volcanic rock had been pulverized into fine dust that got into everything: your clothes, your weapons, your food. But the Japanese positions had survived. Deep bunkers and cave systems carved into solid rock had weathered the bombardment almost untouched. As soon as we advanced, machine guns opened up from positions we couldn't even see. The fighting settled into a pattern that would last for weeks. Attack, take casualties, fall back. Regroup, attack again, take more casualties, maybe gain a few yards. Repeat until you ran out of Marines or the Japanese ran out of ammunition. There were no dramatic breakthroughs, no brilliant tactical maneuvers. Just grinding, bloody attrition that wore both sides down to nothing. Men fought for days without sleep, living on K rations and muddy water, dying for patches of ground that weren't worth it except that the enemy held them. I lost more friends in those northern ridges than in all my previous campaigns combined. Good Marines, tough as nails, who'd survived Guadalcanal and Saipan only to die on this godforsaken rock. Kids who'd never see their 19th birthday, family men who'd never hold their children again. But we kept advancing because that's what Marines do. 1 yard at a time, one position at a time, we ground the Japanese defenders into dust. The breakthrough came in the first week of March. After 2 weeks of frontal assaults that gained maybe 1,000 yards at enormous cost, Marine commanders decided to try a different approach. Instead of attacking the strongest Japanese positions head-on, they'd bypass them and cut their supply lines. It was a risky gambit that required precise coordination between multiple units. The 5th Marine Division would continue frontal attacks to keep the Japanese busy, while the 4th Marine Division swung around the eastern flank to attack from an unexpected direction. I was part of the flanking force, moving through broken terrain that maps couldn't adequately describe. Ravines 20 feet deep cut the landscape into a maze of dead ends and killing grounds. Every ridge had been turned into a fortress, every valley into a shooting gallery. The Japanese had prepared for this possibility, of course. They had positioned artillery to cover the likely avenues of approach, sighted machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire, prepared fallback positions in case their main line was breached. But they couldn't be strong everywhere, and Marines excel at finding the weak spots. On March 7th, after 3 days of careful movement, we broke through the 2nd defensive line. It wasn't dramatic, just a handful of Marines slipping through a gap between strongpoints, establishing a foothold on the reverse slope of a ridge the Japanese thought was secure. But that small penetration began to unravel the entire defensive system. Once we had Marines behind their lines, the Japanese positions became untenable. They had to fall back or be cut off and destroyed. The retreat wasn't orderly. Japanese units broke contact when they could, fighting delaying actions from prepared positions. But their communications had been disrupted, their supply lines cut. Individual strongpoints found themselves isolated and surrounded. That's when the real killing began. The final phase of the battle was the most brutal of all. With their defensive lines broken, Many Japanese units retreated to caves and bunkers in the northern part of the island. These weren't prepared positions, but improvised strongholds that had to be reduced one by one. Cave fighting is the worst kind of combat imaginable. Dark tunnels where you can't see your enemy, confined spaces where one grenade can kill a dozen men, booby traps and mines around every corner. The Japanese had months to prepare these positions, while we had to figure them out as we went. Flamethrowers became the weapon of choice for cave clearing. Marines would work in pairs, one man with the flamethrower, another with a rifle to cover him. They'd approach the cave mouth, send a jet of burning fuel inside, then wait to see what came out. Sometimes nothing came out. The Japanese inside would die from the flames or suffocate from the smoke. Sometimes individual soldiers would emerge, clothes in fire, hands raised in surrender. More often, they'd come out shooting, determined to take Americans with them. I was part of a cave clearing team that must have reduced 50 positions in the final week of fighting. Each one was a nightmare that tested your nerves and your training. Each one cost us Marines we couldn't afford to lose. The worst was a command bunker complex that had been built into a natural cave system. Intelligence said it held at least 100 Japanese, including senior officers who were coordinating the defense of the entire northern sector. Getting close required a coordinated assault by an entire company. Marine infantry would suppress the cave entrances while flamethrower teams and demolition experts worked their way forward. Artillery would bracket the area to prevent Japanese reinforcements. The attack went in at dawn on March 16th. I was carrying demolition charges for a flamethrower team led by Sergeant Mike O'Brien, a veteran of 3 Pacific campaigns who'd volunteered for the most dangerous job on the island. Remember, O'Brien told us before we moved out, these guys have been underground for weeks. They're desperate, probably out of food and water. That makes them more dangerous, not less. The approach to the cave system was across 200 yards of open ground that had been registered to be Japanese mortars. We moved during an artillery barrage, using the smoke and noise for cover, but even so the enemy spotted us before we got halfway there. Mortar rounds began dropping around us with deadly accuracy. Machine gun fire from hidden positions raked the advancing Marines. Snipers picked their targets carefully, going for officers and NCOs first. O'Brien took a bullet through the leg 50 yards from the cave entrance but kept moving. "I'm fine," he insisted when I tried to help him. "Just keep those charges ready." We reached the cave mouth under covering fire from a Marine rifle company. The entrance was larger than most, maybe 8 feet wide and 12 feet high, carved out of natural volcanic rock. Perfect for defense, a nightmare for attackers. O'Brien's flamethrower sent a stream of burning fuel deep into the cave system. The screams that echoed back were inhuman, men burning alive in confined spaces with nowhere to run. But even dying, some of the Japanese kept fighting. A grenade bounced out of the cave mouth, exploding close enough to shower us with rock fragments. Rifle shots cracked from the darkness, bullets whining off stone walls. Someone inside was shouting orders in Japanese, trying to organize a defense even as his world burned around him. I tossed my satchel charges deep into the cave as I could throw them, then grabbed O'Brien and dragged him clear. The explosions brought down half the cave roof, sealing the entrance and everyone inside. One more position eliminated. One more step toward ending this nightmare. General Kuribayashi made his last stand in a cave complex near the northern tip of the island. Intelligence had been trying to locate his command post for weeks, but the wily old general had stayed one step ahead of our patrols. On March 23rd, Marine reconnaissance units finally tracked him down. The caves were hidden in a ravine so well concealed that you could walk past it without seeing the entrance. It had taken brilliant fieldcraft to find it, and it would take everything we had to root out its defenders. Kuribayashi had maybe 300 men left out of the 21,000 who'd started the battle. But they were his best troops, officers, senior NCOs, and veteran soldiers who'd been fighting Americans for years. They had plenty of ammunition, some food and water, and absolutely nothing to lose. The final assault began at 0500 on March 26th. 3 Marine companies attacked from different directions while artillery pounded the area around the cave complex. But after 5 weeks of fighting, we were all running on empty. Companies that had started the battle with 200 men were down to 50 or 60 effectives. I was part of the force attacking from the east, moving through terrain that had been fought over so many times it looked like a moonscape. Shell craters and abandoned equipment littered the ground. Bodies that had been there for weeks were half buried in volcanic ash. The Japanese positions were invisible until you were right on top of them. Machine gun nests carved into solid rock, sniper hides camouflaged with volcanic ash, interconnected tunnels that let defenders move from position to position without exposure. But after 5 weeks of this kind of fighting, we'd learned a few things too. Marine squads worked with deadly efficiency, each man knowing his job and trusting his buddies to do theirs. Flamethrower teams and demolition experts had become artists at their deadly craft. The final assault took 6 hours. 6 hours of the most concentrated violence I'd ever experienced, as 300 desperate Japanese made their last stand against overwhelming odds. When it was over, General Kuribayashi and all his remaining troops were dead. Iwo Jima was ours. The battle officially ended on March 26, 1945, though scattered fighting continued for several more days. Japanese holdouts in bypassed caves kept up sporadic resistance, more from habit than hope. Marine patrols hunted them down methodically, sealing caves and bunkers that had been missed during the main battle. The statistics were staggering. In 36 days of fighting, we'd taken 28,686 American casualties, including 6,821 killed in action. The Japanese lost virtually their entire garrison, over 18,000 dead, and only 216 prisoners, many of them too badly wounded to resist. 3 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman earned the Medal of Honor on Iwo Jima. 27 other Marines received the Navy Cross. Hundreds more earned Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Hearts. But statistics can't capture the real cost of victory. I lost friends on that island I'll never forget. Kids who'd grown up during the Depression, who'd volunteered to fight for their country when they could have stayed safe at home. Men who'd survived the worst the Pacific War had to offer, only to die on 8 square miles of volcanic ash that most Americans couldn't find on a map. But their sacrifice meant something. Iwo Jima became a base for P-51 Mustangs escorting B-29s to Japan. Emergency landing field for damaged bombers returning from raids on the home islands. The island that cost so much blood to capture saved thousands of American lives in the final months of the war. More than that, it proved something important about American fighting men. When pushed to the limit, when facing impossible odds, ordinary kids from small towns and big cities could accomplish the impossible. They could take on the best the enemy had to offer and win through sheer determination and courage. I returned to the States in June 1945, just before the war ended. The ship that carried us away from Iwo Jima was packed with wounded Marines, guys who'd given everything they had for that godforsaken rock. We didn't talk much during the crossing. There wasn't much to say. But as our transport cleared the harbor, I took one last look back at Mount Suribachi. The American flag was still flying from its summit, snapping proudly in the Pacific wind. That flag, and Thiemann who died to put it there, had become a symbol of American resolve that would endure long after the war ended. Joe Rosenthal's photograph of the second flag raising became one of the most famous images in American history. It inspired war bond drives, memorial sculptures, and countless works of art. But for those of us who were there, it represented something simpler and more profound. Proof that American Marines could accomplish anything when they set their minds to it. The battle for Iwo Jima was unnecessary in many ways. The war was already won by February 1945. Japan's defeat was just a matter of time. The island's strategic value was debatable, its cost in human lives almost unbearable. Military historians still argue about whether the operation was worth its terrible price. But I know why we fought there. Not for strategic objectives or political goals, but for each other. Marines died on Iwo Jima because they couldn't bear to let their buddies down. They advanced into impossible situations because the guy next to them was depending on them. They kept fighting when every rational thought said to quit, because that's what Marines do. That's the real legacy of Iwo Jima. Not the strategic value of 8 square miles of volcanic ash, but the proof that ordinary Americans could do extraordinary things when their country needed them most. I kept in touch with some of the survivors over the years. Thompson went back to his farm in Iowa, married his high school sweetheart, and raised 4 kids who never heard him talk about the war. Kowalski used the GI Bill to become an engineer, built bridges instead of blowing up caves. Most of us just wanted to forget what we'd seen and done on that island. But we couldn't forget our friends who didn't make it home. Every February 19th, I think about Corporal Santos and his Brooklyn accent, Private Kelly, who wanted to be a teacher, Sergeant Rodriguez, who was 2 weeks from rotation. They're still 19 years old in my memory, still believing they were going to make it through the war and get home to their families. The Japanese fought with incredible courage on Iwo Jima. I won't take that away from them. General Kuribayashi and his men knew they were going to die on that island, but they fought anyway because they believed in their cause. They turned 8 square miles of worthless rock into a fortress that cost us more casualties than any other Pacific battle. But in the end, American determination proved stronger than Japanese preparation. Marine training proved superior to Japanese fanaticism, and American industrial might, the ships, planes, tanks, and ammunition that kept coming no matter what, proved that this war could have only one outcome. The flag that flew over Mount Suribachi represented more than military victory. It represented the triumph of free men over tyranny, of democracy over militarism, of hope over despair. Those 6 Marines raising that flag weren't just planting a piece of cloth in volcanic soil. They were staking America's claim to the future. 3 of those flag raisers didn't survive the battle. Navy Corpsman John Bradley, Marin FC IRA Hayes, and Marine PFC Rene Gagnon made it home to become reluctant heroes, forever linked to one of the most famous photographs in history. But they always insisted they weren't the real heroes. The real heroes were the guys who didn't make it off the island. Maybe they were right. Maybe the real heroes were the Marines who died taking nameless ridges and forgotten caves, whose bodies fertilized that volcanic soil, whose sacrifice made victory possible. They didn't live to see the flag raised or the war won, but they made both possible. 70 days after Iwo Jima fell, American bombers dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered in September 2, 1945, ending the most destructive war in human history. The invasion of Japan that would have cost hundreds of thousands of American lives never happened. Did our victory on Iwo Jima help end the war? Military historians still debate that question. But I know it proved something important to the Japanese leadership. Americans would pay any price, make any sacrifice to win this war. We'd proven it on a worthless piece of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That knowledge that Americans would never quit, never compromise, never accept anything less than total victory, may have influenced Japan's decision to surrender rather than fight to the bitter end. If so, then every Marine who died on Iwo Jima helped save lives on both sides by shortening the war. I'm an old man now, one of the few survivors of that terrible battle. Most of my buddies are gone, claimed by age, disease, and the lingering effects of what we went through in the Pacific. Soon, there won't be anyone left who remembers what it was like to crawl across that black sand under enemy fire. But the story of Iwo Jima will live on. It's become part of American mythology, a symbol of what this country can accomplish when ordinary citizens are called upon to do extraordinary things. The Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia, based on Rosenthal's famous photograph, ensures that future generations will remember the sacrifice made on that distant island. Every time I see that memorial, I think about the boys who didn't make it home. They're frozen in bronze now, forever young, forever raising that flag on Mount Suribachi. It's a fitting tribute to men who gave everything for their country, who proved that the American spirit is stronger than any enemy. The black sand of Iwo Jima has long since been washed clean by Pacific storms. The caves and bunkers have been sealed or collapsed. Nature has begun to reclaim an island that once ran red with blood. But the memory of what happened there, the courage, the sacrifice, the determination of American Marines will endure as long as this nation remembers its heroes. That's my story of Iwo Jima. Not a tale of glory or adventure, but the truth about what war really costs and why some things are worth fighting for. We didn't fight for territory or strategic objectives. We fought for each other, for our country, and for the idea that free men should never bow to tyranny. And in the end, that was enough Towin. Staff Sergeant Tommy McKenna, 5th Marine Division, passed away in 2018 at the age of 94. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, not far from the Marine Corps War Memorial that immortalizes the flag raising he witnessed on Mount Suribachi. His Medal of Honor citation reads simply, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with the 5th Marine Division during the assault on Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands, February 19 to March 26, 1945.